My daughter looked into my eyes and said, "The best gift would be if you just died." Those words still echo like cold blades inside me. They weren't spoken in a moment of fleeting anger, but at a signing inside a bank, where every glance seemed to reduce me to nothing more than an obstacle too old to matter. At that moment, the air grew heavy. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. The manager pretended not to hear, straightening his tie, while the customers behind him fidgeted, curious, almost pleased by the spectacle of humiliation. What was at stake wasn't just money. It was my very dignity being auctioned off in front of strangers. And then I realized. There was something in that document, something hidden behind the rushed words and false promises. Why was it so rushed for me to sign? Why that look of triumph on my daughter's face, like someone already celebrating before the end? Every detail pierced me. Her sweet perfume, contrasting with the coldness of the sentence that killed me inside. The pen gleaming like a silent weapon on the table. The immense bank with its glass walls felt more like a cage, and I, the cornered prey. Can love fester to the point of turning into poison? Or had this poison been brewing for a long time, drop by drop, until the moment it shamelessly exploded? It felt like falling into a dark well, but I soon realized. It wasn't an abyss, it was a tunnel. And every tunnel leads to an exit. There was a secret buried there, in the complicit silence of the bank, between the lines of the papers, in the haste that hid fear. A secret that should never come to light. A secret that could destroy reputations and reverse roles. A secret that would transform me from a victim into something much bigger. I took a deep breath, and instead of signing, I just looked at her. Because in that look was the beginning of a turning point. The flame no one imagined still burned within me. I stood there, motionless, as if each second were a heavy stone piled on my chest. The bank had that cold smell of air conditioning mixed with the expensive perfume of the other customers, a cruel contrast to my skin, already sweating under the strain. My daughter kept her gaze fixed on the table, avoiding my gaze. But I saw a trace of impatience at the corner of her mouth, as if my hesitation were just another nuisance. There was something deeply symbolic in that moment. Me on one side, surrounded by papers that could erase the entire history I'd painstakingly built. She on the other, with the arrogant haste of someone who believes she's already won. It's strange how certain scenes seem to imprint themselves not only on our memory, but also on our bodies. I remember the sound of hurried shoes on the shiny floor, the hushed conversations that seemed like comments about me, even when they weren't. I felt reduced to an uncomfortable silence, as if I were out of place, and yet I was the one who had held that place my entire life. It was at that moment that something clicked inside me. The pain I felt wasn't just that of a mother. It was the pain of a woman who carries on her shoulders the strength to survive sidelong glances, doors that never opened the first time, smiles that never truly existed. I realized that what was happening there wasn't just a matter of money or inheritance, but of dignity. My life was being treated like a disposable signature, as if I were just a name to be erased from history. Perhaps that's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation that emerges from these stories, because they know it's not just about me, but about everyone who has ever felt the weight of ingratitude and contempt masked as formality. I took a deep breath. I didn't sign. The silence I left in the air was so heavy that even the manager looked uncomfortable. My daughter bit her lip, almost unconsciously, and in that gesture I saw hidden fear. She knew the game wasn't won. And it was there, in that interval of seconds that seemed eternal, that I realized. I needed to find out what was behind that rush. Something told me that the real scandal was yet to be revealed. The air seemed thicker by the minute, as if the bench itself had become an invisible stage where everyone awaited my next move. I could hear the chair's subtle creak as I leaned back, my sweaty fingers sliding across the polished wood of the table. The pen remained there, motionless, like a silent invitation for me to give up on myself. And yet, the more time passed, the more I sensed that this object was not just a writing instrument, but a blade in disguise, and I would not be the victim who bled in silence. I looked around and noticed the curious eyes feigning indifference. Some whispered, others looked away too quickly, but everyone, without exception, sensed the tension. It was like being under a cruel spotlight, illuminating not only my fragility but also the strength I tried to keep hidden. Every second, shame tried to crush me. Every second, pride tried to lift me up. There was a painful contrast between my daughter and me. I, with hands marked by years of work, bearing the wrinkles that tell stories no one ever wanted to hear. She, young enough to dress up impatience as elegance, treated haste as a right. She didn't realize that, behind the rigidity of my posture, something she never imagined was beginning to emerge. A silent resistance. What if I signed? This question swirled inside me like poison. I would lose not only my possessions, but the thread of authority that still held the memory of the mother I once was. To sign would be to accept the death she wished for me in cold words. Not signing, however, could bring consequences that even I couldn't yet foresee. Time seemed doubled, as if each tick of the clock was a warning that disaster was lurking. I sensed there was something beyond the obvious hidden in that paper. Trap, perhaps, a well-calculated lie. The glossy surface of the pages seemed to hide more than it revealed, as if they were closed doors behind which lay secrets capable of shaking more than just my name. And it was in that moment, with my heart beating in a rhythm that no longer belonged to me, that I understood. What was at stake wasn't just the inheritance or the signature. It was the truth hidden in every line of that contract. And that truth, sooner or later, would emerge, even if the price was devastating. For a moment I closed my eyes. It was as if the din of the bank had faded, leaving only the muffled sound of my own heartbeat. I saw my life pass by in fragments. The girl I was, laughing at the smallest of odds, the woman who learned to swallow her pride to put food on the table, the mother who believed that love and sacrifice would one day be remembered. But there, before me, was the daughter who seemed to see none of that. It was a shock that hurt not just as rejection, but as the erasure of my entire history. When I opened my eyes, everything came back more clearly. The reflection of light on the glass wall, the manager's rigid posture, the impatient tapping of fingers as people waited in line. Every detail seemed to tell me I was alone in this battle. But solitude, I realized, can also be a refuge. It gave me the clarity that if the world didn't applaud my resistance, I could still sustain it in silence. It's strange how the mind seeks metaphors to endure pain. I thought of an ancient tree, bent by the wind, but still standing. Its invisible roots supported more than the eye could see. That's how I felt, battered by the years and the stares of others, but rooted enough not to be toppled by a signature. At this point, I know many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message has touched them. Because, deep down, everyone has experienced this invisible weight, this expectation of silence when life demands courage. My daughter cleared her throat, and the sharp sound brought me back. She looked up quickly, and for the first time I noticed a crack in her confidence. Perhaps she, too, was afraid of what I might discover. It was like seeing a crack in a seemingly solid wall. Subtle, but enough to signal that collapse was possible. I took a deep breath and remained silent, not out of weakness, but out of choice. Something inside me told me that this silence, more than any words, was already beginning to change history. And it was just the beginning of a revelation that promised far more than anyone on that bench was prepared to face. The silence I had chosen began to transform into something almost palpable. It was like an invisible veil stretched across the table, suffocating the hurried gestures and hidden glances. My daughter shifted her leg under the chair, trying to hide her anxiety, and the manager shuffled his papers as if trying to hasten a conclusion. But I didn't move. And the more still I remained, the more I felt the power slowly returning to my hands. Inside, however, there was a war raging. The memory of years of struggle mingled with the fear of losing everything in an instant. What would become of me if that signature became the sentence that would erase me? But at the same time, there was a thread of hope, tenuous but firm, that resisting might open a crack, reveal something that had until then remained hidden. I imagined a dark room where someone lights a candle. The light doesn't resolve the emptiness, but it exposes the outlines of objects, revealing forms that were previously invisible. That's exactly how I felt, still in the dark, but already able to see that there was more than met the eye. The contract before me wasn't just a bunch of clauses. It was a map that hid the path to a secret. This realization changed my perspective. I began to notice details that previously held no weight. The different handwriting on one of the pages, the employee's almost aggressive haste as she turned the pages, the way my daughter bit the cap of her pen, as if trying to control time. Small signs that, when added together, revealed that the story wasn't as simple as they'd have me believe. And in this contrast between the fear of loss and the possibility of discovery, my heart wavered. I knew that any gesture could be definitive, but I also knew that, behind that paper, there was something hidden that could turn everything upside down. It was at that moment that I felt like an omen, that the truth was already beginning to creep in. Still invisible, still muffled, but about to emerge in a way that no one on that bench could control. It was like walking across a narrow bridge suspended over the void. With each step, the feeling that I might plummet grew, but at the same time, there was the strange certainty that it was precisely this risk that kept me alive. The contract before me wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a mirror reflecting everything I could lose and, at the same time, everything I could still protect. My daughter restlessly drummed her fingers on the table. The dry sound echoed within me like a drumbeat in an ancient ritual. Each tap seemed to accelerate the choice I hadn't yet made. The manager, with his practiced impersonal smile, seemed more like an elegant shadow of the bank itself, part of a system that had already decided which side I would take. I was just the misplaced piece, and they wanted me to accept the role without resistance. I looked at my hands. The prominent veins, the marks of time, the small cuts life had left as reminders of work never recognized. They trembled slightly, but carried the story of a survival no one could erase. I thought about how I had so often been seen as fragile, when in fact, it was this very apparent fragility that hid an unbreakable strength. The light streaming in through the large windows reflected off the marble floor, creating patterns that seemed to dance between shadow and light. It was impossible not to notice the symbolism. I was in that very space, between the darkness of an imposed destiny and the clarity of an unexpected choice. Fear pulled me one way, hope the other, and it was in this suspension that I felt time stretch. The air grew denser, as if each breath carried weight. The realization that something much greater lay behind that haste became almost unbearable. It was like hearing a whisper you can't understand, but insisting on calling your name. I knew it wasn't time to act yet, but I also knew the truth, that restless shadow was already approaching. And once it surfaced, nothing could be silenced. I realized my refusal to sign hadn't been an isolated gesture. It was like a stone thrown into a pond. Ripples began to spread, albeit silently. The previously indifferent atmosphere of the bank seemed to breathe with me, attentive to every hesitation, every glance I averted. My daughter, impatient, bit the inside of her cheek, a tick that only appeared when she felt cornered. That told me more than any words could. There was something she didn't want me to understand. This realization gave me unexpected strength. I began to notice details as if they were clues to a puzzle. The employee's haste in turning the pages, the lack of clear explanations, the way certain terms were hidden in small print. It was like walking down a hallway full of doors, knowing that behind one of them lurked the truth. And the curious thing is that the longer I waited, the more discomfort grew on the other side of the table. Power silently began to shift hands. It was then that I found myself imagining something beyond the moment. I thought about how every decision shapes not only the present, but also how we will be remembered. I saw two scenarios before me. In one, I signed and my story was erased, reduced to a voiceless trail. In the other, I resisted, and this gesture became a mark of courage, however small, however solitary. These images stayed with me like vivid, almost prophetic visions. A shadow of loss hung over me, but also a glimmer of triumph, as if I could choose between letting them uproot me or proving that I could still flourish, even under the weight of contempt. It's curious how these situations spark deep reflection. Many, faced with something like this, feel the urge to share their thoughts, as if putting them into words were a way to breathe. Perhaps this is the moment when you too feel this impulse, to comment on what this scene evokes in you, to express what is so often kept silent. And as I held my daughter's gaze, I understood that the real game was just beginning, and that every second of resistance brought the revelation everyone was trying to hide ever closer. Her gaze began to waver, albeit for almost imperceptible moments. It was like watching the surface of a seemingly calm lake tremble with small ripples, betraying the hidden force beneath. This crack in her confidence was confirmation that my resistance was not in vain. Every second I maintained silence became an invisible wall, and that wall was already beginning to encircle her. I could feel the atmosphere shifting. The air conditioning blew its usual chill, but the room seemed to heat up with the unspoken tension. The windows reflected not only the light but also the growing unease between us. The entire space seemed complicit in the secret that was about to emerge. And in this setting, even the most mundane details, a pen forgotten on the counter, the distant sound of a phone ringing, felt like signs of something greater approaching. It was inevitable to reflect on the contrasts that surrounded me. On one side, the fear of loss like a shadow following me closely. On the other, the almost timid hope that my steadfastness would reveal more than I imagined. Between these extremes, I walked like someone balancing on a thin line, aware that one false step could make me fall, but also that moving forward could lead me to the terrain where the truth awaited. Images overlapped in my mind. I saw my daughter celebrating a premature triumph. I saw the manager sealing an unfair deal, but I also saw myself standing proudly, exposing before everyone the deception they tried to impose on me. These visions weren't just dreams. They were omens. Each one reminded me that the fight wasn't just on paper, but in the courage to hold my gaze and not give in to the weight of the pressure. And it was precisely in this delicate balance between shadow and light that I felt the inevitable approaching. Something was about to shatter, like cracked glass that only holds firm until the next impact. I didn't yet know where the revelation would come from, but I was certain that when it did, it would change everything. The silence between us became alive, almost material. It was as if the bank's glass walls held every pent-up breath, every furtive glance, every unspoken thought. The tension wasn't just inside me, but radiated through the air, vibrating like taut strings about to snap. My daughter looked away frequently, and each time she did, I saw more of what I wanted to hide: insecurity. The kind of insecurity that betrays a poorly guarded secret. I fixed my attention on details that seemed to take on new layers of meaning. The stack of documents on the table was no longer a jumble of papers, but a maze. The tiny lines, the hurried signatures, each page held the promise of something hidden. The metallic gleam of the pen reflected the light like a discreet dagger, reminding me that one choice could sever the bonds between us forever. It was in this contrast that I remained, between the shadow of fear and the uncertain clarity of resistance. My heart beat with an irregular rhythm, as if trying to keep track of something that hadn't yet happened. It was a strange rhythm, mixing the urgency of doubt with the hope of revelation. With each beat, I wondered, how far would the truth go if it were exposed? How long would the masks hold before breaking in front of everyone? Images overlapped in my mind like scenes from a fast-paced movie. I saw myself alone, defeated, with signed papers in my hand and dignity draining from my fingers. But I also saw myself standing firm, before an invisible audience silently applauding my courage to say no. These visions weren't certainties, but warnings. The future seemed to be watching me from afar, waiting to reveal which of them would be chosen. And it was in this play of possibilities that I understood. The decisive moment was approaching, and there was no escaping it. Everything was set like a stage, and the curtain was about to rise. I just didn't yet know which truth would emerge first, the one that would destroy me or the one that would give meaning to all my resistance. The moment that seemed endless was shattered when I decided to hold her gaze, not as someone defiant, but as someone finally understanding their own place in the world. The tension that had built up around me transformed into something different. Instead of weight, it became strength. I was no longer the woman cowering before a cold table. I was the living history that no signature could erase. The image that came to me was that of an ancient flame, seemingly extinguished, but with a gentle breath, it lit up the darkness again. This flame was my voice, my memory, my dignity. And in that moment, I understood that everything they tried to smother in silence could be reborn, stronger than before. The fear was still there, true, but it faded into insignificance in the face of the certainty that resistance was, in itself, a victory. I felt the atmosphere shift. The manager looked away, uncomfortable. My daughter took a deep breath, lacking the courage to face me fully. And I, silently, occupied the space so often denied to me. It was like crossing a bridge I had built myself, step by step, with each firm gesture. There are times when life confronts us with seemingly simple choices that carry the weight of an entire existence. This was one of them. And perhaps that's why many, when following stories like mine, feel the need to leave their mark, to like, comment, and subscribe so as not to lose the thread that connects so many similar journeys. Because what is revealed here is not just mine, but the work of everyone who has faced the pain of being treated as invisible. I let the pen rest, unhurried. The gesture was small, but it echoed like thunder within me. And as I lifted my face, I realized I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The revelation was yet to come, but within me, the transformation had already taken place. It was the silent certainty that, no matter how much they tried to erase me, I would always be a root. And roots, even hidden, know the right time to break through the earth and blossom before everyone.